Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Davies, and I'm not a physician. I'm a physicist. As Ingrid just noted, the fundamental premise underlying today's event is the science of climate change. Now, if you're among those confused by this science, it's understandable. For one thing, it's complex. But more importantly, the sheer volume of confusing and conflicting information pouring over us every day is staggering. Consequently, the Utah physicians here today have asked me to help clarify the state of the science for the record. I'm here as an independent and informed voice, not affiliated with any environmental or political organizations. So let me begin with this. The following are the unequivocal conclusions of both the international and American climate science communities. Earth is warming. Nearly 2 degrees Fahrenheit, global average in the past 150 years, about half of that coming in the past 50 years. Now, while this might not sound like much, it's a rate of warming about 10 times greater than the rate lifting us from the last ice age, and a rate that's expected to increase in the coming decades. Now, on this point of warming, there's been considerable chatter in some corners of the media that Earth is actually cooling, that global warming has stopped, that we haven't warmed since 1998. This is confusing to many and utterly wrong. It's a piece of misinformation that comes from a complete misunderstanding of the notion of climate. So let's take a look. This graph shows global average temperatures for the past 150 years. The last year, on the far right, is 2008. Two things are clear. The overall trend is definitely upward, and there's a fair amount of year-to-year variability. In other words, while the trend is up, not every year is hotter than the last. It zigzags up, maybe like a stock chart. The climate isn't about short-term ups and downs. It's about longer-term averages. And climate change is about longer-term trends. So let's look at this graph from the viewpoint of climate. While it's true that 2008 was definitely cooler than 1998, which was the warmest year on record, the 2000 to 2008 average here is substantially warmer than the 1990 to 99 average here. Roughly speaking then, this is what the data looks like to climate scientists. It's definitely not cooling. A second, to a high level of scientific confidence, humans are now the single largest influence driving this change in global climate, at least 10 times stronger than the next largest natural influence, perhaps as much as 30 times stronger. Third, the risks posed by this abrupt warming to humans, human society, and the human ecosystem this century are very large and rapidly growing. Finally, the scientific consensus on these points is robust, as strong or stronger than the consensus linking cholesterol to heart disease, earthquakes to plate tectonics. Now, it would be my preference at this point to take time to cover each of these conclusions in some detail. Unfortunately, our time today is limited. Therefore, with respect to warming and cause, let me briefly say this. The conclusions on warming and human cause are based on an overwhelming preponderance of evidence. Literally thousands of independent lines of evidence, all consistent with a rapidly warming planet, attributable primarily to human activities, principally the burning of fossil fuels, which adds heat-absorbing greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and large-scale changes in land use, such as deforestation, which alter nature's ability to remove these gases from the atmosphere. Now, on these next 2 points, projections of where our very best science tells us we're headed, and the level of scientific consensus, I'll spend just a bit more time. So to better understand the risks we're facing, we need to examine where we're headed and place this trajectory in historical context. This temperature scale ranges from about 45 degrees Fahrenheit, the depth of the last ice age, to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, a global average temperature last seen on the planet over 50 million years ago. Now, this green oval covers the range of the human climate. This is the climate in which the modern human ecosystem evolved and has inhabited for its entire 200,000-year existence. Humans have never existed outside of this climate. 150 years ago, at the beginning of the industrial age in earnest, we sat just above 57 degrees. Since then, we've added about 2 degrees. So that's where we've been and where we are. Where does the science say we're going? In 2007, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the IPCC, using ensemble modeling results from nearly 24 groups around the world, projected between 3.5 and 8 degrees of warming by 2100, depicted here in red. Unfortunately, the intervening 2 years have seen strong evidence suggesting changes are progressing bigger and faster. More recent modeling work has revised these numbers substantially upward to between 5 and 11 degrees of warming, global average, by 2100. Now, from a climate science perspective and a risk management perspective, these numbers are simply staggering. As this graphic makes absolutely clear, even the most optimistic projections tell us that unless we're able to mitigate our impact on climate in the very near future, humanity will envelop itself in a climate substantially different than any we've ever known. Further, it's critical to note that not all places are being or are expected to be affected equally. Now, this graph depicts the same temperature data I showed you earlier, plotted slightly differently. It's the change in global average temperature over the last 100 years. This graph shows that same period in the American West, and this graph, the change in the Colorado River Basin, including Utah, more than double the global average. That is already observed. So how does one assess the consensus on this science? First, let me be clear. I'm talking about scientific consensus, the kind that arises among the relevant scientific community based on published, reproducible evidence. Think of it this way. If a few thousand cardiologists agree your arteries are clogged, you're not likely to care if a single cardiologist disagrees. You're certainly not going to care if a dermatologist disagrees, if a talk radio entertainer disagrees, or if the odd politician disagrees. I actually have pause for laughter right here. So in order to assess scientific consensus then, one looks to the relevant scientific communities as reflected through science's large collection of formal scientific organizations. To begin, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the largest, most comprehensive scientific review panel ever assembled on any topic. It comprises thousands of scientists and has been examining the question of climate change for over 20 years. In that time, they've issued 4 reports, each more detailed and comprehensive than the last. Their most recent report, the 4th Assessment Report, was issued in 2007. The portion examining warming and cause is over 1,000 pages long and based on more than 6,300 published studies. Their conclusions were these: we're warming. Humans are the principal cause, and the risks to humans, human society, and the human ecosystem this century are large and growing, all to a high level of scientific confidence. Now, in response to this report, an impressive collection of the world's relevant scientific bodies have issued formal statements concurring with IPCC's principal findings. These include 36 national and royal academies of science, the American Earth Sciences Community, the International Earth Sciences Community, the broader American community of core physical sciences, the broader international scientific communities, the biological science community, and the human health sciences community. So let me reiterate. An impressive collection of the world's relevant scientific bodies have issued formal statements concurring with IPCC's principal conclusions: we're warming, humans are the dominant cause, and the risks we face are unprecedented. In all, 76 concurring scientific organizations. And if you look for a dissenting organization, you won't find any. Coincidentally, simultaneous with yesterday's hearing at the legislature on climate change, 18 of these societies reissued their concurrence in the letters to all the members of the U.S. Senate as they consider the upcoming climate change legislation. So if this is not scientific consensus, I don't know what consensus would look like. Going back to this graphic, I'd like to conclude with the following thought. While much of the science underlying these conclusions is comprehensible to non-specialists, the principal reason for most of us to take them seriously is not because we understand the details of climate physics. Rather, it's because a very large, sincere, dedicated, and competent scientific community is telling us, with one voice, with high confidence, that this is the reality of our situation.